session. Okay, so SHU is basically the starting point where you learn about an approach and you start learning how to use it. And really, Scaled Agile is very excellent for that in organizations wanting to start Agile. And then HA is a place basically where you start to adapt your rule a little bit. You start to try experimenting. Maybe you have different lengths that you want to do in terms of the amount of things that you're putting into your sprints. Maybe you're going to try adapting different things. So Ha is basically, and then Re is when you kind of become a master of something. And that usually does take some time. But Re is when you become a master and you really are learning from your own practice. So that takes many years. And I would say that, even to this day, I'm still learning. But Shuhari is kind of the approach that is used for Agile and digital transformation. And Scaled Agile is a very good starting point. So a lot of organizations will use Scaled Agile. Let me see if I can show some of those. So for those of you guys who go to the Scaled Agile Framework website, you're going to see the customer stories. And that's where you can see a lot of the organizations that have been using Scaled Agile. They usually change this every time I check it. So let's see what it looks like today. And loading. So it talks about some of the improvements that organizations see. But at the top here, let's see how long this takes to load. It actually shows organizations like Southwest Airlines and for IT services and CVS, which is the American Pharmacy, Deutsche Telekom in Europe, let me admit. And then we have ZKH Industrial Supply, the U.S. Air Force, Kaiser Permanente is a U.S. healthcare provider, Porsche, everybody knows Porsche, I'm sure. So these are all just case studies. Chevron, I know there's a lot of work they've been doing in Southeast Asia and using Scaled Agile is with that as well. American Express, so Allianz. These are many just examples of organizations that are using Scaled Agile. And you can find that there's a lot of organizations that use it because it's a very, it's a very well-defined way to adopt Agile methods. I think that's the strength of it. The weakness is a lot of people will complain and say, well, it's very prescriptive. Does anybody know what prescriptive means? Anybody know what prescriptive means?
No.
Okay. Prescriptive means basically it gives a very set way to approach it. And there are many Agile practitioners who kind of feel like, well, should it really be that set? Should it really be that, delineated that everything is already set up for me, and all I do is just kind of follow it. So that is something that some people like executives and big organizations like we saw. And then there's a lot of other people who are Agile coaches and they go, oh, I don't like that because I don't think it should be so set, right? Or prescriptive. So there is both a lot of benefit there and a lot of criticism. I haven't looked at the latest numbers on adoption. I know that Scaled Agile is the largest used enterprise Agile approach in the world currently. And I'm not sure what percentage that is. I'll have to take a look and see what percentage of organizations are now using it, but definitely leading most others. And I think a big part of that is because there's a very set defined approach for how you would use Scaled Agile. So you can certify on it, you can learn. This is the overview of the big picture that kind of shows the different areas. We have these different disciplines in Scaled Agile: lean portfolio management, organizational agility, continuous learning culture, enterprise solution delivery, Agile product delivery, team technical agility, and lean Agile leadership. And these are the different areas that you can kind of go into. We usually go into a class called Leading Safe or Leading Scaled Agile Framework certification. That's a starting point where people start to learn about Scaled Agile. So one of the strong points is that it's really used very broadly. People in HR and everything else all around the world are all very familiar with Scaled Agile at this point. If you look at job listings, people are looking for it as a skill set and a certification they want people to have. And organizations are using it for transformations. I think one of the criticisms is that people say it's very prescriptive and it's very set. So that it's very specific how you're supposed to use it. And what you do, but I think that's also a benefit and a strength. I've done work with organizations like Disney and Toyota and Allianz and many others, and I can tell you that these are the things. Either we do it using Scaled Agile, or before Scaled Agile, we used to do it the hard way, doing it defining ourselves. A lot of these lean Agile principles are exactly what we use for digital transformation and for digital delivery in organizations, large organizations. Smaller organizations, like I run a startup company now. A small organization with only, maybe a couple of dozen people, it may not make as much sense because, you know, usually the minimum size for a release train, which is this down here, the minimum size for that is usually going to be about 25 to 50 people. So you probably would not make sense if your entire organization was very small to try to use all of Scaled Agile. But if you have a larger organization, enterprise, we talk about enterprise agility, Scaled Agile really is very effective, very useful for that. Okay. So what I want to do is see what kind of questions you guys have. Really is kind of just an open Q&A, ask me anything, open mic kind of thing. So you can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat, or you can ask otherwise questions you have about Scaled Agile, about the certifications. There's multiple certifications. Let me move this over so you guys can see that as well. So for certifications, let's see if we can find them here. Resources, where they put them today. Safe training, there we go. Okay, so for certifications, you'll find if you click over here, this should load up really quickly, hopefully. There's a lot of different certifications that you can do for Scaled Agile. Leading Safe is kind of the introductory one. And each one of these is usually like a 2 or 3 day class. So you can say which course is right for you. And I find it very important for people to actually take the certification. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of people and certified hundreds and hundreds of people over my career in Scaled Agile. And so it's very important because this really gives you a good practice. I remember working with one guy and he said, oh, you know, I know Scaled Agile. I know it very well. He was in a big consulting company, and you probably know what consulting company I'm talking about if you look at my own profile, but working with a large consulting company. And he said, oh, I know. He was, I think, one of the clients. Hey, I know how to use it. And then he started talking about how we need to have project managers and how we need to have people who are, you know, directing everybody and how they need to work. And this was completely the opposite of Scaled Agile, completely the opposite of Lean and Agile. So a lot of times people will kind of say, hey, yeah, I know how Scaled Agile works. I know how to do it. But reading the website is not enough. You really want to get a certification. So if you're going to be a Scrum Master, Safe Scrum Master, if you're going to be just joining in as a leadership team, joining the organization that's starting to use it, maybe leading Safe. But these certifications are really important. They're offered public and private. Our organization's been doing the private ones, and you can find a lot of public ones listed on the website. But they're very important for really understanding how to use Scaled Agile. And I usually tell people who are going to adopt it in their organization, you should have at least a minimum of like 51% of your teams that are going to be working on it certified if you want to be successful. It's very hard to be successful if nobody in the organization is certified, because you end up talking like the guy that I was telling you about who really had no idea what he was talking about. And this is really, if we go back to the big picture, it's just too complicated in terms of all the different areas to try to wing it and not to have any background, any certification of any kind. So I think it's really important to have that certification. It's really important to have that knowledge. It's really important to get you know, that part of it. So I've talked a little bit about, I've kind of introduced you, showed you guys the big picture, which is the introduction to Scaled Agile. I've showed you the different certifications. I'm also going to open over here in another tab here. Let's open this in another tab. Open, link a new tab. I've also showed you guys a lot of the different customer stories. Right, let's see if that's still loading. Right, so all the organizations like American Express and Southwest Airlines and CVS Health and Deutsche Telekom, and all the large U.S. Air Force, all the large organizations that are using Scaled Agile today, very popular, one of the leading. We talked about how it is looked for by HR and hiring and recruiting. They're really looking for people who have these skill sets as well, right? So a very desired, a very popular skill set to have. So what I would like to do is kind of open it up, see what questions you guys have. If there's things you don't understand about it, how I talked about Shuhari, how I talked about in general using Scaled Agile, go ahead and just let me know if you have questions, if there are things that you'd like me to clarify, like the certifications or the big picture, or, you know, adopting it or things like that, case studies. So go ahead. I'm going to just give it a second here. Anybody have questions?
What is the validity of the certification, John?
What is a certification?
Validity of the certification. Is it 2 years or a lifetime?
Usually it's, I believe, and I've got to look at the latest, but it's usually 1 year and then you can renew every year. So you usually don't have to redo the certification. You can just pay a renewal fee. and then you can renew your certification. But to get the certification, you do have to pass an exam. So you got to take the course, which is usually a 2 or 3 day course, depending on leading safe's a 2 day course. And then once you've taken the course, you take an exam, and you have to pass that exam. Depending on the class, it's usually like 70%, 75%, maybe 80% correct. You have to pass the exam. Then you get the certification. You also get the digital badge that you can use on your online profiles like LinkedIn. And then every year you would then just pay a renewal fee unless there's a major change or upgrade in the framework, in which case you might need to do an update for your certification.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Any other questions? Mandy or Tina, you guys have any questions on Scaled Agile, how it's used, the case studies, sort of those kind of things? Any questions about that? Have you heard of other Agile approaches? Are you familiar with other Agile approaches? I guess like Spotify, a lot of people know, or Scrum. Do people know those? Has anyone ever heard of Scrum?
No.
You've never heard of them? Okay.
No, because I was previous working in the government sector, so I was not familiar with that.
Okay, so Scrum is actually, you can see here, it's one of the basic team level Agile approaches that's used. It's very popular around the world. It's probably the most used Agile approach anywhere, would be Scrum. And then Kanban is another one. So these are basically team Agile, usually teams of like 7 to 10 people, maybe up to 12 people will use Scrum. Safe Scaled Agile scales that up across 7, 10, 12 teams or more. But Scrum is one of the most well-known and popular. Has anybody else ever heard of Scrum?
Yes.
Who was that?
Ramesh.
Ramesh, what have you heard about Scrum?
Yes.
So what do you know about it? Or have you used it, or?
Yes, presently I'm working as a Scrum Master.
Okay. Okay, so you're very
So
familiar.
it's a framework. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
Have
a
you,
framework.
how many people do you have in the team?
Yeah. 9.
9 people. Okay, so that's about a typical size for a Scrum team. All right. So Scaled Agile takes Scrum and kind of brings it up a level so that it can be used across the entire organization, right? So if you have a program with 10 teams in it, you could use Scaled Agile for that, right? So there might be, usually the cap for one release train is about 125 people, which would be about 10 to 12 teams, right? So that, and then you can have multiple what we call release trains or solution trains, which actually give us even more, right? So Scrum is kind of the foundation of the base level. Kanban is another base, comes from Toyota Manufacturing and Lean. And these are 2 of the foundations to Scaled Agile. So we use that, but we scale it up a level when we're using Scaled Agile. We bring it to a larger across the organization, like Boeing, Aircraft, and Lockheed Martin, I think, uses now. A lot of them are all using Scaled Agile as an approach to do this for very large projects, and even cyber physical systems. So things like airplanes, where you have software, but you also have firmware, you also have hardware, right, that's being built. And all of those are using a Scaled Agile approach. I think we actually had a case study that, like, the US military. Where is it? US Air Force, right? So Northrop Grumman, you can see they're actually using DevSecOps. They're using Scaled Agile here. Let's see if it pulls up pretty quickly, right? So they're using Scaled Agile for a multi-billion-dollar defense system. And this is actually very common. Like the US Defense Department uses Scaled Agile quite a lot now. US government uses it quite a lot because of the adaptiveness, but it's still something that they're comfortable using. So there are a lot of kind of case studies of that, but Scrum is the small level where you can do it for a single team. And so is Kanban as well. Like in my startup organization, we use kind of a Kanban approach for a lot of our work, our flow and sales and projects that we're working on, and we use that using the Kanban. Okay, great. All right, any other questions?
No.
Okay, Ramesh, thank you. So do you feel that your Scrum is pretty successful that you're using?
Yes, please. Yes.
Very good. Yeah, I've used Scrum in a lot of places, including at Walt Disney was one of the biggest ones. We used Scrum and kind of scaled it, and it was quite successful. Even though there are some challenges when you go large scale, it is very successful. So we were glad to see that, and I like it. I like it as a way of working much better than the traditional waterfall approaches that are used. So I find it much more flexible and much more useful, in my opinion, as well. And a lot of organizations are doing the same thing. Okay, let's ask any other questions. What about, you might have to type it, Weisheng, but Weisheng, do you have any questions? Femi, please, can I know how to choose the best approach to use? So great question, Femi. If you're using waterfall, which is kind of traditional design, build, test, requirements, design, build, test for software, that is something that, it used to be used a lot in older software development, I'd say maybe 20, 30 years ago. Today, that is really not the leading way in Silicon Valley. Is definitely an agile approach. So it's going to either be Scrum or Kanban or some other agile approach that people are going to use. Spotify came out of Silicon Valley. And it's very adaptive, right? So we can change and we can go, okay, we did a 2-week sprint and we saw some features and it worked well. We like this, we didn't like this. And then we come up and we try something else and we give another one and we do another sprint and we see how that works and we keep on going, right? So it's very adaptive. So I would say today, if you are doing anything in software technology, 90% likelihood is you're going to be using an agile approach. There are very few organizations today that are still only using traditional waterfall, which is an older approach, very fixed, and you can't really change it once you get started. So I would say, Femi, if you're working in technology, now if you're working on building construction, you're building airplanes, I'm sure it goes back and forth. I'm sure some may use more of an agile adaptive approach, and some may use more of a fixed traditional project management approach. So it goes back and forth. But when you're using software technology, I would say agile, and I'm guessing a number for you, but I'd say probably like 80% or more of new software development is going to be using an agile approach. Does that answer your question, Femi? Are you typing there? So I'm not sure. Yes, it did. Okay, great. Yeah, so great question there and great question about certifications. Other questions that you guys have? Tina, Ramesh, Elizabeth, any questions you have today?
No questions from my end.
Okay, so we get used very heavily, of course, across all kinds of domains. I've used with Singapore government. I've used Scaled Agile. I've used it with, telecom and other services companies in Thailand and throughout the region, Hong Kong and the airlines industry. So a lot of people are using Scaled Agile approaches, and definitely throughout the Asia region as well, not only in the US now. So very well used. We're actually adapting and moving into Africa and Middle East as well, trying to start adapting and adopting more in those regions as well, to use these approaches. So this is a very popular approach now, and I think for good reason, because people want to be adaptive. They don't want to be stuck where they can't adapt and change and move along with changing requirements and changing times, because things are changing rapidly now, right? All the time with AI and all kinds of new technology and all kinds of things adapting in the world. Obviously, we just came through the pandemic and all those types of things. So we know that things are changing so fast. You have to be able to change in your business, your software development as well. You have to be able to change really fast as well. So that's really what Scaled Agile does for us. Also Scrum and Kanban on the team level. DevOps, which some of you probably saw the DevOps pipeline there. DevOps is also a part of this, and being able to use DevOps. So all of these are really parts of Scaled Agile. A couple things that I would check out as well if you're interested in learning about it. Of course, you can take a look, and I'll put them in the chat box here. Of course, take a look at the scaledagile.framework.com website, because that's really going to be a great place for you to look. Also, I have a YouTube channel, which I think I actually happen to have up here. So I do a lot of stuff on Scaled Agile, and you can look at that. I usually put recordings up there from a lot of our meetup sessions, and also have some whiteboard animations and things that will teach you about Scaled Agile. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check out on the YouTube channel as well. Elizabeth has information. Our company does support training and things like that as well. The company that I work for, which is Agile and Blockchain. So you can also check that out if you have questions or you want to start doing something in an organization. We have partners that are SPCTs, which is Scaled Agile Program Consultants, and SPCs, so that and trainers, so that we are able to work to help people as well. Using Scaled Agile in their organization, certifying and getting started with their leaders and their executives. Sometimes like people want to do an executive half-day workshop or kind of bring it in for their teams to start learning about their leaders so they can get started on a transformation. So those are all good things that you can do. Elizabeth, I'll leave it for you to type in the information in the chat box there for Auspicious. And then any other questions anybody has? And of course, keep following the Meetup site because we are always updating. Usually every month we have additional meetups as well. Okay, other questions, other thoughts, things, challenges that people have with using Agile, Scaled Agile, issues that have come up in the past? Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So there's links as well. That's the company that I work with. And okay, I think if there are not more questions, and we kind of give an overview, we've given you a picture, the big picture of Scaled Agile and the overview, what that looks like. You can go to Scaled Agile Framework website for that. You can check out my YouTube channel if you like listening to my voice. You want to hear more of the different things about what we're doing and see some of the past meetups as well. The certifications you can find in the Scaled Agile website, and you can find usually the first certification that people are going to do is going to be the Leading Safe certification first. And then we also we talked about a lot of the case studies and things like that. And you can find those also on the site if you're kind of, you're thinking about learning about it or your organization is thinking about it. This is a great place to start where you can just go and start to understand who's using it, how they're using it. It shows kind of, 10 to 50% happier, engaged employees, 30 to 75% faster time to market, 20 to 50% increase in productivity, 20 to 75%, 5 to 75% improvements in quality. So you can see all of those are happening using a Scaled Agile approach. And these definitely are benefits that we see as far as business results. So I think that those are all the points I have. Elizabeth, anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up with the meetup session for today?
Yeah, I think Femi has a question. What are
Femi, you
the
have another question? Okay.
principles, to consider when choosing an agile approach?
Okay, great question. So Femi, for agile approaches, and we talked about, obviously there's Scrum is one of them. There's Kanban is another one. There's Spotify. There's large scale Scrum, which is called Less. There's Nexus. There's many different approaches you can use. The first question is it going to be a big team? Is it a big, 50, 100 people? Or are we just talking about like Ramesh, you're working with 9 people, right? So if you have a small team, you're not really going to need everything in Scaled Agile. You're probably going to just be able to use Scrum or Kanban, and that's going to be enough for you. Now, if you are going to be scaling up, that's usually where a lot of the coaches and consulting companies and stuff come in. We help people with that as well, and our partners do. And then you're going to be saying, okay, well, is it, is an organization that's already been using an Agile approach? Like Spotify, they actually defined that approach for their own organization. ING Netherlands, they use the Spotify approach, and they were one of the first big kind of bank organizations to use that. But that's not really a framework that you certify on. It's more just something that company came up with for themselves. So now, if you're looking at something where you can certify, you can train and be very consistent, Scaled Agile is a very good approach. There are others that do the certifications. I think large scale Scrum, I think there's one called Flight Levels. None of these are as popular as Scaled Agile. So the other question is, if you're doing it personally, do you want something that's going to make you very marketable? Scaled Agile will make you very marketable, right? So, because it's definitely the largest Agile scaling approach and framework in the market today. And then the other thing is, is your organization already using one of these? And that's a good question too, right? If they're already using Scrum, you might want to start there. If they're already using Kanban, and your organization is, then we would use a Kanban kind of a flow approach. You want to use that. So think about what your organization is already using. Are you doing it for your organization? Or are you doing it for your own personal career growth, right? And then, you have to think about if you're really going to do a large scale implementation, you have hundreds of people, bring in people who are certified either on SAFe or other approaches, for agile scaling have experience. Like I've been doing it, like I said, for a decade or more. You want people who've seen a lot of these things to help you so that you don't find yourself kind of falling into the common traps, because there's a lot of common traps and challenges when you're trying to use agile. And if you don't avoid those and have someone to kind of guide you in scaled agile, that would be what we call an SPC, safe program consultant. We should have them in the picture down here, I think, at the bottom. Where are they? The SPC, right? But an agile coach or that kind of thing, you need somebody who's used the approach that you're using to really be able to help you and has the experience with it. So, Femi, those are some of the points I would think about. Does that answer your question? Do you have kind of a follow-on question to that? Common traps. So there are many common traps that I've seen over the past decade or more using Agile, right? Some organizations start trying to use Agile or large-scale Agile like SAFe. And what they do is they go, oh, we're going to use this large-scale Agile. But they don't really teach any of their executives or leaders about it. And then the leaders come in later and go, oh, why aren't you doing this? Why don't you have a fixed timeline? Why don't you have a fixed date for everything to complete, right? Because in Agile, it's very adaptive. Now, we haven't used the right kind of metrics, right? Because these metrics are very important for us, especially if we're using like an Agile approach. You got to use the right metrics, okay? So when we don't educate the leaders in the organization, that's a very common trap. It's that, you know, whoops, we didn't realize, and now the executives don't believe that we're doing anything because we didn't educate them about, you know, how Agile approach, how scaled Agile works. Another common trap is basically the same, not having executive support, where the leaders are not really supporting what's being done by the teams. And another one is not training and certifying the team members. So if we don't really have people attend the trainings and we don't have people certified, you know, people don't know what they're doing. It's kind of like me saying, hey, you know, we're all going to become gourmet chefs, but I don't teach anybody how to cook, right? So now we're in trouble because we're all supposed to be gourmet chefs and starting this big new restaurant, but nobody knows how to cook, right? So that's trouble. That's problematic for us. So those are common traps. There are a lot of other ones. And like I say, you want to talk to somebody, you know, who has expertise, especially if you're starting a transformation or moving up to scaled Agile, that you can learn about a lot of those common traps, because those are things that you may be able to learn a little bit by reading, but you really want to have experienced people on your team. Elizabeth says, could you please touch a bit on ensuring the code quality, especially for the engineers working in a company that have diverse engineering practices? All right, Elizabeth, let's talk about code quality. So if we go back to the big picture, let's see if we can get that out of the way. There we go. Okay, so if we go back to the big picture, there are several areas where we look at code quality in scaled Agile, right? One of them is going to be with our DevOps, right? And DevOps is going to DevSecOps, actually, is going to actually incorporate a lot of code quality, continuous integration, continuous deployment, automatically checking that nothing breaks the code base. We're also going to be using a lot of what we call XP practices, right? So XP is extreme programming practices. And these practices, let's see if we have it in the little article here, right? Scrum XP. The XP practices actually are several things that are used for code and making sure that we have a very high quality of our code as well. I want to see if they actually talk more about the XP part in this article. So Scrum XP is one that is used to make sure that we have very high code quality, Elizabeth. And then another one that we are using is a DevOps and the continuous integration, right? Should be here. Continuous integration, continuous deployment, this pipeline, which makes sure that our code is not broken. It tests everything with automated testing. We have different things like blue-green tests and automated deployment that make sure nothing gets broken. Version control. You can see a lot of the other things here, right? We move this out of the way. You can see we got break features in the stories, behavior-driven development, test-driven development, version control, very important. I've had so many projects break because people didn't keep right versions of code. Built-in quality, application telemetry, being able to understand what affects what when you deploy code, threat modeling. So all of these are practices. And continuous code integration, build and test automation, trunk-based development, where everybody's merging back into the same trunk code base. Gated commits, where we have to make sure that everything does not break before it gets committed to the code base. Application security needs to be incorporated into the code. So all this stuff is part of DevOps, continuous integration, pipeline, and also the XP practices, Elizabeth. These are the things that we use to make sure we have code quality when we're developing and using Scaled Agile or using other Agile methods. Did that answer your question, Elizabeth?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Femi, answer your question there. Any other questions? Femi, I'm using a Scaled Agile approach. What are the things that a company needs to have in place? So there is actually a roadmap. Femi, if we take a look down here, you see this little roadmap at the bottom of the big picture. If I click on this roadmap, the roadmap is going to have basically the things kind of get started. So people usually start ad hoc. They have some waterfall, traditional, some agile. We need to train people. So we'll do the leading safe, do implementing safe, the trainings. We start to get maybe a lean agile center of excellence where we have kind of a center where everybody can work on the shared principles as they're adopting it. Have SPCs and trainers and people like me who are experienced to help your team along, and then start training your teams, right? And start defining what's going to be in your release, in your release train. And you're going to train your teams, maybe start Scrum Master, product owner training, architect training. So there are other supplemental certifications and trainings you can do on Scaled Agile as well. And then you go on with continuous improvement, right? So you're executing, you're delivering quickly. And as you deliver, you want to use the Agile metrics, which we have here, and expand it in the organization and accelerate that. So this roadmap actually takes you through a lot of those steps, Femi. And I think the most important thing is to really have experienced SPC and people to support the transformation, because there's a lot involved in being successful with Scaled Agile or any Agile approach. Okay. Can I answer that question for you, Femi? Great. Okay, are there other questions about Scaled Agile, about the transformation, certifications, the big picture, case studies, traps and challenges, anything else people would like to know about? Great questions, by the way. Great. Okay, well, I think that's everything we're going to cover. We should have, I think Elizabeth will be updating as well for the group on the meetup. We should be having some different guest speakers coming up in the next several months to join us for the meetups, and partner speakers, SPCTs, etc. So we'll be looking forward to those sessions with you guys, and please continue to come back and join so that in the meetup, so that you're able to continue to learn about the Scaled Agile approach and how it works. And I'll put a link for the meetup site, and I'm sure that most of you already have that because that's how you joined today, but I'll put that into the chat as well. So you have that, and I should be posting a recording probably next day or two of this session, so you can do that. So we have the links down here. You can check those out. Check out my YouTube channel where I do a lot of talking about this, Scaled Agile website, our meetup group, and then you can also follow Especially Agile, which is our organization, Elizabeth, that I work for. If you're interested in actually doing implementation or certifications, you can reach out to Elizabeth as well on that. She supports that for my team. And I think that's it. We're going to have more speakers coming up here. So we need to go ahead and just keep watch of the website on meetup.com for the speakers we're going to have for the next several months in the meetup sessions. And I think that's all. So any last questions before we wrap up? Great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing you in our next month's sessions. And have a great one. Elizabeth, if you can just stay on for a minute, and maybe for a moment. And thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank you,
great
John.
rest of your
Thank you
day.
for the session.
Thank you for your sharing. I will read your website and YouTube.
All right, very good. You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, Elizabeth, so do you have any more ideas as far as monetizing, et cetera, on this? Based on kind of our session today.
I think I think the premium membership would work because according to the questions that I've had people asking and also the interaction.
Hold on a second. I need to
that would
stop our recording. Give me a moment.